What's going on? Welcome to Tech with Sean, and today I'm upgrading my system to Alder Lake. I was previously on a Z390 board with a 9900K, and I'm moving up to Z690 and the 12700K today. First off, I'm just taking off the parts from my system that I'm not going to keep. I am going to carry over the power supply, cable extensions, the RAM kit, the fans, and the Commander Pro and everything. So I'm leaving a lot of stuff in there and just taking out what I need because I don't want to have to redo all the wiring for the fans and all the cable management for the IQ stuff. Now I'm dropping in the motherboard, and I went with the Z690 Areo G DDR4 from Gigabyte. At this point in time, I felt like DDR4 made the most sense for a gaming build. The gains you get from DDR5 I don't think are worth the cost because those kits are going for a lot of money and they're hard to find right now. For the storage, we went with the PCIe Gen 4 Samsung 980 Pro 1TB for the boot drive, and then I'm throwing in some other drives that I have for additional storage. You can fit 4 M2 drives in this board, and then there's I think 8 SATA ports, so you can hook up a ton of storage. There's the processor. We're going with the 12700K, and that's going to deliver really good gaming performance, but it's going to save you a few bucks compared to the i9. For the cooler, I have the iQOO H100i Elite Capellix for maximum RGB, and I got the white colored version so it would match the rest of my build. I think it's going to look pretty slick once I get it all hooked up. Getting the RAM kit in, that's a 3200 MHz Corsair Vengeance RGB kit. Now I'm finally able to remount the fans. Those were dangling in the middle of everything and making it really hard to work and especially film this. Now I'm mounting the cooler, doing the paste, all that stuff, running the wires. There's quite a few little things to do when you're hooking up one of these AIOs, especially with the RGB lighting. And let's see, just doing a few things, getting in the GPU bracket. Now we're finally mounting the graphics card, and after that, we're about good to go. Okay, benchmark time. I ran a 3D Mark time spy and we got 18,905 with 14,000 on the CPU score. Now comparing that to my previous 9900K, it got a 17,512 with around 11,000 on the CPU score. Then 3D Mark Firestrike and we got over 35,000, which that's personally the highest score I've ever gotten on this. It's pretty impressive. First game benchmark we got is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and this is a particularly CPU heavy game typically, and the 12700K is doing a pretty good job and pulled in an average of 88 frames per second, which that's good for this Assassin's Creed. Next is Far Cry New Dawn, and this is pretty interesting because if you look up at the GPU utilization, you'll see that even the 12700K can't fully utilize the 3080 Ti in this game. It's still pushing over 100 frames per second, so you're not going to be struggling or nothing playing the game, but it's just interesting to see that this game has sections where it's still CPU limited, even on the Alder Lake i7. But altogether, with a minimum of 91 frames per second, that's going to be a good experience. Next up, this is a more esports type title, Strange Brigade. It's lighter, and this is cranking out a ton of frames per second. So if you have one of those 1440p 240Hz monitors, you'll be able to take full advantage of that with this chip and something like that. And you'll see here that we got 271 for the average FPS. Next up, we got Watch Dogs Legion. This is 1440p max settings, everything, RT reflections, and DLSS on quality. And you'll see here right now it's getting over 70 frames per second. This is a pretty demanding benchmark, so these are good numbers to see at that resolution and settings. And here on the results, we've got a max of 94, average of 70, and a minimum of 40. So running at those high of settings, that's actually a pretty impressive result. Next up is Horizon Zero Dawn. This is running at 1440p on the Ultimate Quality preset, and again, it's doing really well. It's getting over 120 frames per second, and that's going to be super smooth in a game like this. I think it was only 30 frames per second on PS4. And you'll see here that the average is 139, so just about maxing out a 1440p 144Hz screen. Alright, we're back. It's now the future, and it took me a little bit to get this thing set up. It's really my first time using Windows 11, so there was a little bit of quirks there. And the memory in here was giving me problems with this motherboard, so it's a XMP 3200 kit, but I've always ran it at 3600 with some overclocking. And in this board, it booted up fine, 2133, the regular JDEC speed or whatever, and then as soon as I hit XMP and saved it, it wouldn't reboot. I pulled the battery out to reset the BIOS and everything. The clear CMOS button didn't work. I had to actually remove 2 of the sticks and change the memory configuration so that the board would spit out an error and let me get back into the BIOS, so that was kind of weird. I updated the BIOS, and really what ended up being the case, it just needs more voltage. I don't know if it's maybe the change from Z390 to Z690. Maybe the memory controller is more complicated and just needs more power, but I was able to run it at 3600 again. It just took more voltage. I ended up putting it at 1.37, so not terribly high, but the troubleshooting took a while, and because the board was having those weird errors, I ended up, every time I wanted to go back into the BIOS after changing the memory settings, I'd have to pull out some RAM sticks. So if you have some problems like that, maybe that'll help you. Other than that though, it's running pretty good. I did have some crashes in Forza Horizon 5, but I disabled game mode, and that seems to have helped a lot. I guess that's kind of a common occurrence in Windows 11. Really, once you get into it, it's not that different than Windows 10. I'm pretty happy with the system performance itself and the Alder Lake CPU though. Even in 1440p gaming, stuff like Forza Horizon 5 like I was talking about, there's a noticeable boost to the frame rate. So even though a lot of the benchmarks and stuff show the 1080p gains, you're still going to notice gains in a lot of games at 1440p. In the BIOS, I turned on multi-core enhancement, and that set the P cores to all run at 5 GHz and the E cores to run at 3.8 GHz. It was a little bit toasty, and so I basically just turned the single core boost clock to 4.9, and so I'm running all of the P cores at 4.9 GHz and the E cores still at 3.8, and that dropped my temperatures, I want to say, about 8 C. That's a trade-off I'm willing to make, the 0.1 GHz for about 8 degrees back. Might as well. As far as the looks of the build, the Z690 Areo G, it's not like a totally white board, but since it's mostly silver and stuff, it blends in pretty well with my system, I think, so I'm pretty happy with how that looks. I also really like this H100i Elite Capellix because I'm kind of a sucker for RGB. What can I say? There is some weirdness with the H100i Elite because it comes with its own little, I guess you'd say, RGB box. I think it has like a lighting node core or something like that. But it has this 24-pin connector that doesn't plug into the Commander Pro, which is what I was using to control the fans in here. So I'm gonna have to play around with that and see if there's some combination of stuff I can move around so that I can have good fan control and still control all of my RGB, because right now I have like some little lighting node thing, the lighting node core, and the Commander Pro in there, because I need to be able to control everything, and I've got 6 QL fans. There's the H100i, and then my RGB bracket, I have a IQ adapter going to it so I can control it and sync it with IQ, but that plugs into the Commander Pro. So I don't know, right now I've got a ton of stuff wedged in there though. It does look nice from the outside though, so I guess mission accomplished on that front. For the H100i, I did use the Corsair LGA 1700 adapter kit, retrofit kit, whatever they call it, and it worked okay. You know, the standoffs are a different size, but it went together just like the previous cooler. I did not mount it correctly at first somehow though, and when I initially booted up the BIOS, it was like running at 99C, and I was like, whoa, that's not right. So I took it back apart, loosened the cooler, gave it a jiggle, tightened it back down, and after that the temperatures were fine. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how it all came together though. The 12700K and 3080 Ti, that's a good combination, and it should perform well for quite a while now. It's kind of like one step below the top end, you know. It's not the 3090, but the 3080 Ti gives almost 3090 performance, and it's not the 12900K, but the 12700K gives basically 12900K